Okay, so we are here to interview Mr. Paul Dongha. Let me congratulate you on your new position as the Head of Responsible AI at the NatWest Group. Thank you so much for joining us and being one of our esteemed speakers at the NexGen Banking Summit, which is happening on the 23rd and 24th of October at Canary, Wharf, Hilton, UK. Welcome, Mr. Paul. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind and generous introduction. I'm very well, thanks, and really happy to be here.
So Paul, I'll just jump into the interview. We have 6 questions to go.
Interest in AI started many, many years ago. So I studied a PhD at Manchester University in the UK in the early 1990s. So like a whole generation ago. It was a passion of mine. I was super interested in artificial intelligence, even in those days. And I'd done computer science and programming since I was a teenager. So I was really interested in computing, being hands-on. And when I came across artificial intelligence during my undergraduate days, to me, this is what I wanted to do. So I embarked on a PhD. I did research. I wrote papers in AI. And I used to teach AI. I used to teach computational linguistics. Unfortunately, by about 1997, there was no jobs in AI. There were none whatsoever that I could find. So I started a career in financial services, building systems, building IT systems for trading, sales, and risk management. And I did that for many years. So I was hands-on. I was a development lead. I was a technology lead. I was a program and a project manager. I did that for many years. And in about 2019, 2018, I started seeing AI cropping up in social media, on Amazon's website, collaborative filtering, on Netflix. I thought, hold on, this sounds a little bit like AI. This sounds a little bit like the stuff we used to talk about many years ago. So I left the job that I was doing. I started retraining, if you like, in AI and some of the technologies that we have, like TensorFlow, like Keras and PyTorch. So I was really hands-on and I was programming again. And I quickly came upon the word ethical AI. And to me, this was really important. As soon as I realized the risks of the current AI models, so-called probabilistic models, I realized that this was a really, really important thing and we have to take care of it. So I started working in ethical AI, first at a big tech company, responsible AI, and ensuring that things like bias and discrimination are removed from models and the models are deployed for the benefit of society and people is the most important thing. I'm sure AI will be developed and there'll be lots of brilliant programmers developing it, but charting a course to a responsible deployment, I think, is the most important thing, and that's what I'm doing now. Yeah, this is a really good question, actually, because a lot of people think that the implementation of, let's say, ethical checks to mitigate ethical risks, a lot of people think that that stifles innovation. I don't think that's true. Actually, I think having a robust risk framework actually creates innovation because it allows firms to have certainty about what they can do. So given that we have certainty around what we can do, we know that we can invest and that our investment will in effect pay off. So for example, when we do credit lending or insurance underwriting, we know that we can use our models in a certain way, and we know that those models are going to be robust and resilient. We know that we can remove bias, and we have techniques for doing that. We know we can remove unfair discrimination. We know we can put in things to help with explainability, and we do all of those things. And the good thing about that is we can have confidence that actually once our models are deployed, that they're going to behave in the way that we intend them to behave. And that is a good thing for customers, and it's a good thing for us as well, because it means that our investment is really focused. on something that we know will work and that our regulators will accept. If we don't have those regulations, then we could be open to deploying systems that actually might cause harm to our customers. There might be reputational risk for us, or those systems might not work as intended because we haven't implemented enough guardrails. So not having regulations and having, if you like, too much innovation can actually be a bad thing. And having regulations can actually help us innovate, but innovate in the right way and in the right use cases. Clearly, regulation means there's a lot of things we can't do. So, for example, we can't use surveillance technologies or means of classifying the behavior of our consumers, or making predictions about our consumers' emotions or things like that. Well, I think that's a good thing. I don't think we should be doing that. I think there are certain things that are ethically dubious there, where we're trying to classify people or make predictions about their behavior. And this kind of sometimes behavioral science activity can actually be quite, I think, damaging. And we've seen that in social media, right? We've seen Instagram, and we've seen Facebook certainly do things like this, where really they're trying to some extent manipulate people a little bit. And I think it's good that we just don't do that, right? That should be banned. So I think balancing innovation with ethical risks is actually the right thing to do. Yes, yeah. No, it's a very interesting question. So with AI, we've always had some ethical risks. I think the key ones are things like, bias and lack of explainability in models, amongst other things. But those were definitely the two of the biggest. Generative AI, which is what this question is about, actually, unfortunately, has more new risks, and the existing risks are somewhat heightened, right? They're larger in magnitude. So if I talk about two or three of them, things like bias coming out of generative AI is harder to mitigate against. And the reason for that is a lot of generative AI models have been trained on huge amounts of data, and that's data that we as a bank don't own. So for us to mitigate the bias in the model, we can't change the data that's gone in to train the model, because we don't have access to it, and we didn't train it. So I think there is bias that can come through a model that we can't mitigate like we used to with traditional AI. With traditional AI, machine learning, we had access to the data that trained the model. We could fix the data. We could de-bias the data, and we could access the internal workings of the model. So we could actually affect how the model worked. With generative AI, we can't do any of that. So the only option we're really left with is to mitigate and identify bias in the output and then fix it there. Now, that's certainly, a lot of companies will work on that, and we're working on that as well. We can do it effectively, but it's not quite the engineered solution that one would really want. So that opens up, additional difficulties, if you like. I think another one worth mentioning is explainability. Traditional AI models were fairly complex. Generative AI models are hugely, orders of magnitude more complex. The underlying mechanics in the model is deep neural networks, but on a vast scale. They're really not interpretable. Therefore, they're really not explainable. So it's really difficult to say with confidence how a model will behave in the future, and how it reaches the decisions it reaches. And that presents real challenges. And we, along with other companies, are working to mitigate that aspect. And I think one or two new areas of risk that have been introduced is the leaking of IP protected data. So some of the models in Gen AI, because they've been trained on data that's available on the World Wide Web and on the internet, it has a propensity to leak that kind of data in its responses. So again, there are safeguards we can put in place to stop that happening. But actually, the way the model's been trained, because we didn't have access to the data, it could have been trained on IP protected or copyright protected data, that can come out of the model. And secondly, these generative AI models, to mention a second risk, these generative AI models are really carbon intensive. They're very compute intensive. So, for example, if you ask a model like a GPT-4 a question through a prompt, it will give you an answer, but the amount of processing required to generate the answer is orders of magnitude greater than maybe Google's search tool, right? It really is a huge amount of compute, and that takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of electricity in the data center. It takes a lot of water to cool the data center. So we have now generative AI, which is actually exacerbating the use of electricity, the load on electricity grids, those that are fired and depend on carbon as an energy. Is increasing the amount of carbon footprint of data centers. So we see this as an emerging risk and one that's going to continue unless it's mitigated properly. And I think sustainable AI is really what we need to talk about. So how do we make our AI kind of exactly that? And we encourage other industries to do the same. It's a good question. I actually think the field of AI ethics or responsible AI, it's kind of the same thing, will continue to grow, right, in the coming 5 years. And I think that's because the challenges of AI, because the models are inexplicable, because the amount of data that's trained the models and the complexity of the model, there are all of these factors which mean that we have to be really, really careful how we use the models, how they're deployed, and how we monitor the models going forward. And now generative AI has opened up this huge amount of new work that organizations are undertaking. And some people think, AI is going to be as impactful as the invention of electricity. It's going to be absolutely huge, not just in financial services, but globally. So there is so much investment being poured into AI and using AI in the workplace, in society. I think in a large part that will continue. I don't think it will be everywhere, but I think it will continue. So therefore, I think as the field continues to grow, fueled by these huge models, these transformer-based generative AI models, I think the field of AI ethics and responsible AI is just going to have to continue to grow to keep pace with the scale of generative AI deployment. So I think all of the risks that we've talked about, things like bias, explainability, robustness, resilience, model accuracy, I think all of these things we're going to have to continue to focus on. So I see people in my area continuing to work on this hand in hand with governments, hand in hand with industry regulators. So in the UK, we have the Financial Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulatory Authority that oversee financial services. They will be really keen to make sure that we continue to put in guardrails. So there will be a demand for people who have my kind of role and my kind of skills to be in every organization and to have teams of technical people working in the same area. So when it comes to AI ethics, rather than just writing policy or procedures, there is work we can do within a model to create technical guardrails to stop the models from behaving badly and to stop the risk from emerging. And I'm hoping to see far more technical people work in the field of AI ethics in the coming years. And I think that will happen, right? I think. Oh, this is a good question. A number of things. I think first and foremost, appoint someone who's in charge of responsible AI and ethical AI. Appoint one person that has responsibility for that. And I would say make that a role that is not part of data privacy, is not part of digital legal or compliance. That the role should stand in its own right. So AI ethics should be a role, possibly within the Chief Data and Analytics Office, reporting into the Chief Data and Analytics Officer. So I think that's number one. I think number two, that person would require a team of specialists working for them. It's maybe a small team, right? Maybe 3, 4, 5 people that understand AI ethics and can be there to ensure that a responsible AI practices are implemented across the whole group, right? So we wouldn't want within different business units a responsible AI officer. You kind of want them centralized in one place and then have a team that can work across the bank. So that's number one. I think number two is install quite quickly an ethics board or an AI ethics committee, which should be one board comprised of senior stakeholders that look at ethical challenges when they occur. And that board should have oversight across the whole bank. I think thirdly, you should employ a responsible AI framework. And there are many available now. Different organizations and companies are coming up with responsible AI frameworks. The big technology companies have them within their companies like Microsoft and Google and IBM. A lot of the work that they've done within their organizations can actually be applied to what we do within banking. So there'll be technologies and processes to mitigate things like bias, to improve explainability, to ensure that there are guardrails. So I think bringing in a responsible AI framework that has processes, checks and balances in place is really, really important. And that's what the team should be doing. And that should be put within an existing data science lifecycle. So every bank will have a DevOps methodology for AI or data science lifecycle, or what have you. Putting a responsible AI framework within that is really important, rather than creating something from scratch that sits outside of a bank's data science lifecycle. It should sit within. And I think thirdly, very quickly, is there should be training. So training, communication, awareness of what is responsible AI, why is it important, why should we do it, what are the consequences if we don't do it? And I think that training, communication and awareness, that can't be underestimated how important that is. So a program of rolling out this kind of training to different teams, people at different levels of seniority within the bank, right from more junior staff to execs, that's absolutely mandatory to get everyone to understand why this is important. And that's something that I've been heavily involved in to date. So those are, just off the top of my head, some of the things that organizations should think about. I think the Banking Summit is really important to meet like-minded people. The exchange of ideas with people working in different banks, all in one place, is a really good opportunity to see what everyone else is doing, to exchange ideas on best practice around different AI applications within banking, and then to talk about the future of banking as well. So things like hyper-personalization and the opportunities that generative AI offers. To exchange views on that is, I think, really, really exciting. And my key message is clearly going to be around responsible AI. But I think there's one thing I mentioned earlier that we now need to start taking very, very seriously, and that's the environmental impact of AI. And I think banks need to play their part in ensuring that any increase in carbon emissions because of their workload on generative AI is mitigated, and an approach is adopted that's part of ethical AI within a bank, right, to mitigate that particular risk and that particular impact. So I'll be talking about that at the summit.